welcome back to Driveline's Garage. This video is going to be part of a mini-series where I summarize how my dad and I have modified our little Corvair hot rod. Last time we discussed our work with the HVAC, the trunk, and a few other projects. I began to tell you all about what we did with the radiator, but due to our strict uploading schedule, I didn't get to finish. So that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about today. After completing several miscellaneous tasks, our family had to make an unexpected trip to Wisconsin. Towards the end of our stay, my dad and Grandpa took the headlights and taillights out of the '64 Corvair we bought almost a year prior. We originally bought it because we thought it would make a great parts car for the '63.
Did he give you keys for this thing?
No. That would have been nice.
Yeah.
I remember they couldn't find the keys for the car, so they had to drill out the lock cylinder to get inside the trunk. I found the keys a couple months later under the carpet.
We may have. Wow, look at that. Found keys for the car. We just roached that lock cylinder for no reason under the sun.
Yep. They also had to grind the bolts holding the headlights in place as well.
Oh, it's just glued in there, bro.
There it is.
I'd say those buckets are in pretty good shape.
Yeah, these are nice. Those are shockingly nice.
Thank you, Grandpa. After coming back, we started to work on installing the suspension. To start off, Dad cut the brake lines off of a differential from an '88 Olds Cutlass and installed some rivet nuts into the Corvair's frame to attach the new brake lines to. Then he put in new brakes and drums. He seemed pretty nervous because he hadn't done it in a while.
Literally, I was in high school last time I did a set of drums for a GM.
After wrestling with it for a while, Dad weaved the brake lines on and greased the trailing arms. We bolted everything into place, put the shocks in, and cut the springs down because they were too long to fit.
Do you like my bracelet?
It ended up making the car a lot stiffer than I expected. We lightly sanded the interior of the car, drilled some holes for the brake cables to go into, and made a relief for the wheel well and the clutch master cylinder. We then took the driveline out of the car to paint the frame and install the brake lines. We cut some rust out of the rain channel and welded everything back shut. This makes me wonder how many feet of wire we've burned on this car so far. Have we reached a mile yet? A quarter of a mile maybe? Speaking of wire, we ran out. So we continued to work the interior by wiping it down with some mineral spirits and a coarse scrubby. So Dad wiped it down with some mineral spirits, and I think it looks really cool. It looks a lot more saturated now, the color. I kind of like that. I wonder if that's the same result we're gonna get with the linseed oil. Or if we try it, or if we like what we try with the sample, or...
Well, you might want to give them a little background. We've been going rounds on this for a while now, trying to decide whether or not we want to have the patina or if we want to freshen up the inside and make it nice. I've been nudging and leaning and pushing towards the patina just because I think this car's got a lot of character and I think it looks really sexy.
Yeah.
But she's been hesitant because the color palette on this car isn't exactly her preference, but...
I would prefer it if it looked a little more red, but I kind of like the rustic kind of thing going on.
I think that's more a red-orange.
Yeah, that's more of a red-orange than a red.
It's more orange. It's almost Chevy engine orange.
Yeah, it kind of looks like it, doesn't it?
So I bought Kubota orange, and we've got that vibrant red. I think if we mix that up, we're going to end up with a shiny version of that.
Like mix a little red into
a little red into that orange, and I think we'll have something that'll be close that we can kind of lay down in the seams and whatnot. I've got sound deadener coming, but we can paint the engine compartment that color, the trunk that color, and then lay in where we need to in here, kind of back on that package shelf. We'll blow that in.
We then tested what linseed oil would look like rubbed into a hidden area. The result looked nice after sitting for a while, so after a lot of sanding, we rubbed the car down with it. One thing I really like about the finished product was that some of the metal popped through during the sanding process. I really like the rustic feel of it. We then prepared to paint the rest of the interior where we didn't use the linseed oil. In order to do that, we needed to customize our own color. Look at that.
Not feeling so well today?
I guess not.
We did this by mixing drops of black, orange, and brown into some red Rust-Oleum paint until it matched the car.
It's not a dead match.
Nope, it's still a little red.
That's weird though, because down below it gets really close. I think the sun just beat the red pigments out, I think.
After the car was painted, my sister and I spent a couple weeks with our extended family in Wisconsin.
Oh my god, Aaron!
That wasn't as soft as
Our parents would come later on to pick us up. Before we left, we went to a swap meet there, and I happened to stumble upon a set of wheels that looked a lot like the ones on Dad's Malibu. The thought of having matching, well, almost matching wheels with him made my heart happy. So I asked if we could get them, and he said yes. Eventually we prepared to go home, bringing the wheels and the 64 Corvair with us. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to my uncle, because he gave us some caravan seats for free to use for the build as well. After coming home, we cleaned up the blue Corvair. Watching myself pick through the carpet and the rusty floor brings back memories of me vacuuming the floor of the 63. That and us cutting the floor out. Good times. Good times, good times. I then washed the caravan seats along with the wheels we got, and prepared them for paint. While my sister and I were gone on that trip, Dad started to work on the suspension some more, cutting the old out and putting the new front end in. During the process, he seemed a little nervous about using the spring compressor.
It's like a game.
It's definitely something. If this thing lets go in my lap, that's gonna hurt. You know, the intelligent thing to do might be to actually grab the wrench and put it on that. Let's see if that'll do us.
It didn't turn out to be that big of an issue though, but there was another problem he'd have to deal with.
If you look up in here at the spindle, or the knuckle, whatever you want to call it, right here, it just kind of keeps following in a straight line to the upper A-arm, and it actually contacts. So, I either need to take a little meat off of here, or I need to take some meat off of that. That is verified the correct way, that those are supposed to be in there.
Dad eventually fixed both sides, finished up the suspension, and installed the beginnings of a brake system. He did a lot off camera, so I asked him about it when I got back, and this is what he had to say.
Everything is basically new from the box down, or the steering box down. Cleaned the frame up, painted it, built mount for your reservoir for your clutch master, built-in reinforcement into the nose. I didn't want to do anything on the exterior yet because we want to leave the exterior looking kind of rough and ratty, at least for now. So I built a bunch of reinforcement into the corners and just kind of lapped in some some plates into the inner fender sections, or whatever you would want to call these bulkheads, and then started building the upper, I guess we'll call it the core support mount, because yeah, that's what it is, I guess, essentially. And then tied it into the nose, and I tried to do it as unobtrusively as possible, because we don't want to expose any of this work necessarily any more than we have to John Q. Public. The idea is kind of a sleeper or a stealth bomber, or whatever you would want to call it. We want it nice on the inside in the underpinnings, but not looking like much on the outside.
He later installed the flange for the weather strip, while I began to strip out the 64 Corvair's interior by taking off the door handles. Based on my one and only experience with the 63, I suspected it would be difficult for me. And I was correct. A lot of it was because I didn't remember which way to slide the tool into.
Wrong side, kiddo. You got the right idea, but you're beating the hell out of the tool, and you don't need to. You can pretty well expect that it's always going to be lined like, or aligned like this. So if you're coming in from the handle side versus the back side, or the body side, you should be able to get this clip.
On the bright side, I think I pulled off more by myself than I did on the other car, so I think I'm learning. I think.
I don't think the spring's in there, kidder. You forget how to use your muscles.
Loosen them. I then vacuumed all the surfaces and took more trim off of the ducts, the glove box, and the instrument cluster. Unlike last time, I managed to organize the trim pieces using plastic bags. Some of the screws were rusting, so it was hard to pull them out, but they eventually came.
Playlist doesn't smack me in the face. Please don't smack me in the face. Hello? Sir?
I remember being confused on how to take certain parts out, like the instrument cluster, but Dad figured it out and separated it from the car in the end. I pulled the trim up from the glass and worked my way up to the back seat. I felt like I was on a wild goose chase trying to get it out because there seemed to be a lot of other pieces blocking the bolts and laying on top of each other. But when I got Dad involved, I basically learned I was overcomplicating things. I've done that a lot on this channel, but I hope to get better at not doing it. Once the seat was out, I took the back parts off and everything off the sides that I could. I worked on the most difficult pieces last, which were the duct pieces. Those things have a very unusual shape, so I chipped them a little trying to get them out. It took an hour or two before I could break them free. I didn't film all of it because of that. Once the car was stripped, we had to make a decision.
This we know is problematic. This was our first time trying anything having to do with fiberglass. We utilized some bad information and started with a bad product, right?
Right.
We've got a much better base here. This one is actually solid and relatively clean. It's in good shape, though the paint is not. I was looking at this the other day. What do you think about just casting that piece over again? Trying again, using lessons learned. You want to run with the vents, eliminate them, try casting again?
Eliminate the vents.
All right, I'll get some glass ordered.
After moving the car inside, Dad vacuumed the trunk and removed the emblems off the deck.
It's a Corv.
Alright.
Now it's just a core.
Core.
We then sanded the deck down and taped the holes up. We tried to avoid 2023's mistake by laying 3 coats of parting paste on it, some final touch wax, and some tire dressing.
Yeah, this stuff looks like it doesn't want to stick too good to the metal, so.
That's a good sign. We then made our fiberglass mold, laying down strips of cardboard to act as a brace. After letting it set, we pried it off.
That came out pretty.
I'd say this was a win.
Yeah, look at that. That was so much easier.
Better than the last one.
We found a few small flaws in the mold after looking at it for a while, but we decided to hold off on the piece for a couple months so the temperature could become more moderate. It was August at the time.
We're going to end up body working that in the end. But this is so much better than what we were starting with on the last one.
Dad continued on with the core support, installing the rivet nuts to connect it with the rest of the car. He also fabricated some air dams to push air into the radiator. When that was finished, he put the mount in primer, as well as the 64 Corvair's deck lid. Speaking of primer, we prepared to paint the trunk, the wheels, and the engine bay. The remaining paint for the interior was going to be used for most of it, but it was acting kind of funny.
I'm not seeing a bunch of schmutz in the paint, but it sure is clogging the snot out of these filters.
We used it anyways.
I don't like the way this stuff's coming out or laying down. Actually, kinda cool.
I thought so too. By the time we finished the trunk and got the first coat on the wheels, the remaining paint started to look like something out of the sci-fi movie.
I've never seen paint do that. That's a mystery. I don't know.
We needed an enamel reducer and we used urethane, I think. Though this did react funny between the Magic and the Rust-Oleum. Yeah, the original paint I used was Rust-Oleum. Everything was Rust-Oleum. Then I made a bigger batch and I used Magic thinking it was Rust-Oleum, just rebranded. It thickened up, but it didn't thicken up like that. So there's something chemically different about the Magic. And I ran out of that synthetic enamel reducer, and all I had was the urethane enamel reducer. And apparently urethane and synthetic enamels are different. So that's why we end up with flat red instead of shiny red. Well, we wanted shiny red, and only enough for one coat instead of a couple, maybe three even.
Next, we decided to repaint the engine bay black. I wanted it that way because it would look much better with the future color of the engine. Thank you, Aaron, for painting it. When that dried, I put some sound deadener on the roof of the car. But before I did that, I had to clean the rust off with a wire wheel. I really don't like working with power tools upside down like this, so this part was a little scary for me. I think I might have broken out in a cold sweat here. I got through it though and had fun putting the deadener in there. It reminds me of my love of stickers when I was little.
Roll, roll, roll your boat. I'm in love with the texture of these things. These are beautiful. I think I'm only going to be able to fit 3 in here. I messed up, I think I did.
How do you keep messing up?
7 is the number of completion after all.
Okay.
Their alignment definitely isn't perfect, but I'm alright with that. I used the leftovers around the trunk. I eventually moved on to the metal trim and the bezels, polishing them with the polishing machine. I don't think I understood Dad when he taught me how to use it, so I fought with the machine a lot. It was my nemesis. My nemesis. I would push up against it too hard sometimes.
You don't have to lean so hard on it. You don't have to lean so hard on it. First we'll do it.
After taking some time to actually look at the machine and think, I believe I managed to make at least some peace with it, and finished most of the trim. So do you all remember when I mentioned the caravan seats we got in Wisconsin? Well, Dad tried to create some seat frames for them. He first stripped the frames out of the back seat and took the lower tracks off of what we'd be using as front seats. Then he created mounts on the floor and started working on the frames themselves.
I'm not happy with this. I think we're going to end up adding a plate here or something. I'm not sure how we'll reinforce that. Maybe actually bring it up into here. I pre-made these and then placed them with the indents in the floor so I could actually run a captive bolt and weld the bolt. So those landed in accordance with the channels in the floor rather than necessarily where the frame bolts to the seat. So this is what it is. And then we're just gonna have to work with it. Actually, I can see a way of doing that now. Put a little plate right in here and then tie this all together, which will lock all of this in place right down to the bottom. I should have probably just made those straight rather than tried to follow any form. That was half done. No, that was done entirely because of what I was seeing on the frames for the corvair. But I kind of regret it now. Unfortunately, it is what it is. We're going to keep rolling forward with it. I'll shape these out later. Right now we've got everything kind of locked in place. I'll brace those and then we'll punch those holes a little bit bigger so we've got room to maneuver and a little bit of slop when it comes time to install the seats. But yeah, hopefully that's a clean and simple solution.
I smoothed and cleaned his work up and spray painted the frames black. Dad later came to touch up what I missed, and we put them back in the car. Next, we discussed where we'd put the battery.
If we try to mount the battery in the front end, it's either going to get ridiculous or it's going to get very high inside the chassis, which I really don't want. I'd prefer it actually to be lower, but I don't know that we're going to have any room inside. Our best option might be to mount this back here.
I kind of remember you talking about where we'd have to put it eventually, and you kind of mentioned this as a place a long time ago. So I just kind of figured it would always be there.
Okay.
When I was polishing the pieces and cleaning the seat frames, Dad was working with the instrument cluster, taking the best from the 63 corvair and the 64 corvair and putting them together. He gave me a piece from the cluster to paint. It was my first time spray painting. I did this before the seat frames.
Yay.
Is it done?
Yeah, it doesn't look very good though.
Why not?
He then gave me a lesson on dusting.
See, it's just kind of dusted in there.
Yeah.
Okay, if you let that set up, that's little bubbles all over your surface, right?
Yeah.
Now this isn't a good example because this is not a prep surface. This is very rough to begin with. But if you keep laying it in there, even from a distance, eventually you get pretty decent coverage and the paint starts laying out, blending out in a nice even fashion. Now if you get in close, what happened?
That's what I did.
You flooded it, right?
Yeah.
So come back a little bit and just keep working the area until you have a good wet surface, okay? Or a good wet edge.
Once the piece dried, it was put back in the cluster with the rest of the parts. I then decided to put my attention on the engine. I wanted to paint it so that it would match the rest of the car. That meant I would need to strip or mask off everything not orange and prepare everything else for paint. I started by uninstalling the belt, the alternator, and the pulley. The bolts were a little tight, so I asked Dad for help on this part. Looking back, I probably should have labeled what bolts went and where, like I did with the interior trim from last summer, because putting them all in one bucket eventually bit me in the butt. I later learned that it's important to remember where the distributor is before you take it out.
Okay, so we're pointed at 6. So when this distributor goes back in, we need to make sure it's pointed at number 6.
I don't see 6.
GM engines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You remember that?
V8?
That's the cylinders, yeah.
Is that where the V6, V8 thing comes from?
Well, the V configuration, 8 cylinders, right? You got 4 on a side.
Oh, I never knew that before.
I looked up some videos a little after this on how engines work. A couple of them had CGI graphics that really helped me understand what was going on. So that really made me happy. I can link them down in the description if anybody's curious, but most of you probably already know that information. Anyways, I started to take other parts off the car, like the bell housing. Just like the 64's interior, a lot of pieces seemed to be layered on top of each other. You couldn't just take one part off without taking the other off first. It was like a puzzle. Dad masked off the water temp sensor along with the carburetor, and I cleaned the engine sides with a scrubby and a drill with a plastic bristle cup attached to it. Once that was finished, I took the distributor off.
Oh, look at that. That was easier than I thought.
And got what we could on top until Dad helped me take the carburetor off and tape the holes. After an hour or two of cleaning, I blew everything down. Then Dad sprayed brake clean on the engine, which loosened the paint on it. He didn't know that was going to happen, so I spent some more time working with it. When that was finally done, I lightly sanded the surfaces of the interior trim because we planned to paint them as well. Some of it was just a little crusty, so Dad sprayed them down with rust converter. It had a weird reaction with the remaining paint, so I scrubbed off the little bumps it created. After priming the trim and taping all the engine's holes, we mixed up some paint and sprayed everything down.
What do you think? You like?
It doesn't look too different from what it was.
It's not very, but it'll really look different in the car. Looking at everything else.
When the engine was dry, I cleaned the parts I'd be putting back on it. Most of them with mineral spirits, but I cleaned the alternator using a wire wheel. Due to my lack of organization with bolts, I got overwhelmed and confused, so Dad and I had to figure out how to bolt them in together.
Oh, the wire,
You did it.
the thing came.
You broke it.
What's important is that.
I just touched it and it came apart like that.
You broke it. Abusing my stuff.
The engine was now mostly in one piece, so we moved on to bolting the transmission to the bell housing. It was then that Dad had an idea.
What would happen if we did that? Would that be better or worse? If rather than mount this basically here, or like this, if we brought it back here, that would pull that harness a whole lot farther away from the exhaust than it is on the Malibu. And we're running the harness for this one basically the same way I routed that chunk for the Malibu. If we just open that hole up, we probably have to rebend this, or just make a little short extension bracket. I wonder if that wouldn't be a smarter idea than having it sitting up here, because the exhaust on this one isn't as tight, but it's still pretty tight. That would direct the harness farther back and farther down. I think I like that idea. Maybe we'll just put an extension right here. What do you think? I don't know. Whatever, Dad.
Another issue came up after that.
This is a hydraulic throwout here. This is the slave. This rides on this shaft once we clean it up a little bit. Problem is when you engage this with the clutch, it's going to want to rotate, right? There's going to be its inclination. So they put a pin to center it and lock that slave in location so you don't start rotating this thing and rip these lines out, right? Well, this transmission doesn't happen to have any bosses or anything to allow for that in location.
Could you fabricate
Now,
one?
Yes, Yes, we could fabricate one, but I first made the bracket for the harness. I cut the metal out and then I tried punching some holes with a drill press for the first time. I learned I'm not supposed to push down too hard on the metal. I'm supposed to pulse it, because it might wreck the bit if I don't.
See how I did that?
Yeah.
Just a little bit of leverage, back off of it, let the bit cool down a bit, then back into it, okay?
I refined its shape a little more after the second hole was drilled, and then we put it back on the bell housing. I then moved on to the bracket for the clutch slave. I measured and cut myself some metal bent at an angle and attempted to drill a couple holes in it. The reason why I say attempted was because the bits were having a really hard time penetrating. We believed the former bed frame I was using might have been spring steel, but we didn't suspect it for a while. It was to the point where Dad wrecked an expensive drill set on it.
Do you need oil? The oil stuff?
We're past oil, kiddo. We burned up, what, 3 bits on this and now that?
I think the reason he continued on as long as he did was because he doubted the quality of the bits. On the bright side, I learned that when you want to make a big hole, you're supposed to use a small bit at first and gradually work your way up to the size you need, reducing the strain. We eventually gave up on that metal and used something softer. We still had trouble with the new bits, but other than that, the second piece was much easier to work with.
That's how it's supposed to look.
I'm supposed to cut out a big Dorito.
Basically a triangle.
A Dorito.
And then just whittle and fit, whittle and fit, whittle and fit until it actually truly fits in there the way we want it to.
As I did that, Dad carved out a little room in the bell housing to help the bracket fit. I cut another hole, Dad threaded a bolt and nut through it and cut part of the bolt off.
I got too close. I got too close. I got too close. I got too...
Starting fires?
I melted a clamp in the process, but I welded some flanges to the brace, Dad cleaned it up, I painted it, and he mounted it in place. Last but not least for this episode, we installed the driveline into the car.
Did you just dance?
You call this dancing?
To start, Dad put the transmission back on the engine.
Wow!
He was surprised to see that it slipped on so easily. Once it was bolted in, we wiggled everything into the engine bay. He put jack stands under the rear end to help the process along.
This is why we changed up the way we were doing the radiator.
So we'd be able to take it out?
There's no way we'd be able to get this thing in or out with that rad mount rigidly attached to the car.
What are we fighting? Oh! Hello!
We found out the car was set too low, so we jacked the front end up too. Dad even put a stand under the transmission once it was deep enough into the engine compartment. He used a crowbar to wiggle it more into place. Apparently the starter was in the way, so we had to take that off temporarily. Then he hammered the bolts into the frame, and we tightened them down together using nuts.
Careful.
We then made sure the transmission was in the right place and modified the shift lever to fit the aesthetic of the car, and where my hand naturally fell. We did that by welding the top of the old stick onto the bottom of the one that came with the trans.
Oh my gosh. Oh, does that feel?
Good?
Yeah.
Well, that's about it, everyone. Thank you for watching, and thank you to our subscribers who've watched and commented on all these videos. You guys are great, you really are. I'd also like to say thank you to my grandpa and uncle again for donating parts. They've always been willing to lend a hand in one form or another, despite the great distances we've had between us. Thank you, Mom and Aaron, for helping us film, and thank you, Dad, for even taking the time to teach me all of this in the first place. Thank you for being my dad. Dad. With that all being said, I hope everyone enjoys their first glimpses of spring. I know I have recently. And hopefully I'll see you all next week. Bye!